Hello, I want to show today how to disassemble the hammer or fire control group on the VFC Walter PDP. This has been released only a very short time ago, and so there's no good content on how to actually get the fire control group out or replace springs in there, for example. It is mostly the same as with a Glock from VFC, but there are some differences that I will point out. To take off the slide, I have to cock the gun, and then I can pull down on both sides. There's these like little buttons or switches. If I pull down on both of them at the same time, the slide will just come off. This is obviously now the slide. I just want to show quickly to take out the barrel and the hop-up unit. It's actually really easy here. You just push forward on it, pull it up, and because the spring is captive, it just comes out in one go. This is really cool in my opinion. But yeah, push it back in and it sits there. Okay, but enough for the slide. We're going to talk about the fire control group. So, to get out the fire control group, first thing I usually do is actually I will press the trigger for the hammer to come up. Next thing is you have a little screw here. There's actually two screws. I mean the smaller one that's higher up. And I will just unscrew that. I have the wrong screwdriver. Good to know. Let's go to the right screwdriver. And try that again. So push down on it, and you will start to see that as soon as I start screwing out, like releasing the screw, the hammer fire control group already starts coming out. Now I want to kind of keep it in a little bit. It shouldn't fall out, so otherwise we'll lose some parts. Now when that screw is out, now I can start carefully and slowly taking out the fire control group. Now there are some extra parts here that the Glocks don't have, as far as I know, which can fall out quite easily. There's like a little spring with a little plastic piece here, and there's a little plastic piece here as well. We don't want to lose those. So let's be very careful and start lifting it up. And then as soon as I lift up the silver part here, I should put my thumb on that, or my finger, while lifting it up, because it also is held in by a spring that might fly out. Now it will be held by the trigger bar. For that to release, I actually pull back on the trigger, and then the trigger bar can lift up higher, and now it will very easily come out. So pulling the trigger will allow this trigger bar to pivot up much higher, meaning I can get the trigger group out very carefully. Now you can already see, I will put that aside very carefully, paying attention that that silver part doesn't jump out. I'll get to that in a second. You can already see the little plastic pieces here trying to want to come out, and I will, just for the sake of like completeness, actually take them out to show how to reassemble them. So there is, on one side, there's this piece here, held in by a spring. I don't know if it'll focus, but there's this piece. Let's put that aside. And there's another piece, like a round piece here, which has a spring on its end. So we want to put that aside as well. Now that's essentially as far as we'll disassemble it. There is a spring here, but we'll keep that in there. I guess if it falls out, you can just push it back into the spot here. But we'll keep that as it is. So now we can put this aside, because it's, well, we'll get to it when we reassemble it. So now I want to disassemble the fire control group, or hammer group, however you want to call it. To do so, there are two pins. There's the pin down here and the pin up here that both need to be removed. The pin on the top can only be removed in one direction, it can only come out like this, because there's this like thicker part on the top. So we'll start with that. This is kind of precarious. If you don't pay attention, there will be pieces flying everywhere. So make sure you actually grab onto the top, this area, and onto this side to have all the pieces come into your hands when you push out on this. So now in my case, it just pushed through, but you might need some taps of a hammer to get it out. And I already feel all the pieces trying to come out, so now I very carefully let go. And there will be a lot of pieces as it kind of self-destructs. But don't worry, this looks very scary, but it actually isn't. So now this is the pin, I hope this is visible, that came out. It has a thicker part. We'll put that on the side. And there's already pieces coming out here. So there's, first of all, there's the hammer itself coming out. We'll put that on the side. And this upper thing, which I think it's the cocking lever, I think it's called, will also try to come out. Be careful there. There's actually two pieces here that can fall off. So first of all, the hammer spring, I hope this is visible. And this upper silver piece can also come off, and we'll actually take it off so I can show how to reassemble it. So if you pull that off carefully, it just comes out, and there is a tiny little spring. Again, I hope the camera can see it, a tiny little spring on that, or it's going to be sitting in this spot. So we want to have those also. Make sure we don't lose them. Now, the only thing that's left in here is this silver metal piece here. That's the part that actually holds the hammer back and the spring. For that, we push out the pin on the bottom, and as you can see in my case, it actually starts coming out almost by itself. There's very little resistance until that pin comes out as well. And then you can take out the spring, and finally that lever. And now there's the empty casing of the mechanism. Alright, so now we'll actually start with the reassembly. And obviously you probably want to either replace some parts, so for example upgrade the hammer spring to the winter version if you want to, or for example there's, I think, tuning casings for the group. However you want to do it, you should probably apply some grease. Always recommend this grease, but especially now for this video, I will not be using grease to make it a little easier to see and simpler to work with. Okay, so the first step is actually to reassemble this piece, that little silver piece, and that tiny little spring that comes with it. So we want to bring the little spring into this hole and put it under tension with this metal piece here. Honestly, don't ask me what these pieces do, but better to reassemble them exactly like they were. First thing to notice is that the hole there where the spring goes has a little groove. That groove corresponds with one end of the spring, which is flat, and there is one that's pointing up. We want to have the flat piece sit in that groove. For this, really, use tweezers. Hands are just not good enough. And we want to just line that up in there. Make sure it doesn't jump, like in my case. So, problem is also my tweezers are kind of magnetic, which makes this a bit harder. But we essentially want to line that in here until the spring sits here, the little metal part pointing up. Yeah, I hope this is visible. And that, like the other end kind of sitting in that groove. Now, we want to now get this part under tension. It should kind of, you can see these two It's so small, it's incredible. You can see this metal part has two like corners or indents. Those indents should will index with this metal part, this like protrusion here. But we need to first get the spring actually under tension. If we were to just plug it in now, it would just smash that little metal part, that one pointing up part of the spring. So what I do is I essentially place it like this, and it's not completely in yet, it's just kind of sitting on top there. I'm holding on to that, and then with my tweezers I go in here and I grab onto that onto the end of the spring and start pulling until, while rotating that metal piece, until the metal piece drops into place. And I can let go of the spring, the pointing up piece of the spring, and now, as you can see, this pointing up piece of the spring is now sitting in that groove. And now it's working the way it's supposed to. Careful not to have it jump out again at you, obviously. This is very precarious. For me, it just jumped out again, but you will get the point. I'll reassemble it off camera again. Now, the next part involves us putting this thing back into this. For that, we'll start by placing the hammer spring. And this should be placed, there's essentially two ends to it, at least in this version. This should be placed with the hooked side going in like this. Let me see if I can show it. So the hooked side should kind of hook onto that metal part, that protrusion, and it just sits there. It's definitely not a tight fit or anything, it's just gonna kind of loosely sit there. And now it just has to go into the housing. So for this, essentially just bring it down into the housing. And it will not immediately make sense. It will not immediately line up with the hole here. But first of all, pay attention that the other end of the spring is sitting on top of this ledge. Like that. And now I can essentially, making sure that this stays on there, making sure this doesn't fall apart, I can start pressing down on it back here where my right finger is until the holes line up. And then I can hold on to that, careful not to have it jump out, while taking the pin with the thick end and driving it through that hole. Need to move it back and forth a bit, but eventually need to make sure the holes actually line up and don't just pretend like they do. Eventually it'll start clicking into place, at least like a little bit, just the first part essentially. And I want to push it in, not all the way, but I want to push it in only like this far, so that this area in the down here between those two kind of wings stays empty. Because now you take the hammer and you want to bring it into that kind of that empty area which we just made sure that there's no pin there yet. And we take the thicker end, and that essentially needs to go between those two. And the hammer itself, the end of the hammer, needs to come out here. So I'll drop it in there. And this will not work immediately. For this to work, you need to start pulling back here. And it will then kind of slide into place. And there we go. So in my case, the pin was a little bit too far in there. That didn't let it go in, but by pulling out the pin a little more, it worked. And now I can start pushing the pin in. And hopefully captivate that hammer part. At this point, now you can start pushing the pin all the way through. It'll not be like super easy, but eventually you get it all the way through. Okay. To test that you've assembled everything correctly, pull back on the hammer, and this thing should be able to go back when you pull it back and come back out. It doesn't come out, like it doesn't, as you can see, it stays out, but with gravity it does go back. So that's the important thing. Okay. So now that we have this, the only two pieces that are missing is that latch and that spring, and obviously actually three pieces, the pin holding them in place. What we do is we take the latch, and it has, right, this is the wrong piece, this is the latch. It has this like thin piece, this wing. This has to go in like with the wing pointing to the left, and it just drops in there. That wing needs to go, like this wing needs to go come out here, and that wing needs to be sitting down there. And now we'll take the spring, and there's one end of the spring that is flat and another one that is, or that has a hook, I say, and the other one is flat. You want to have the flat one sit on top of that wing we just placed, and now take the pin, line everything up. Be careful, there is actually two holes here. Wait, I need to show this. There's a hole here and a hole here. We want the left hole. Line up that spring first, and then line up that little lever second until the pin goes through and holds both in place. Now, obviously, this thing is still missing here. So what we need to do now is we need to get this thing here, this end of the spring, to hook into our hammer. This is to essentially make it not use gravity anymore to come out, but actually come out by or pull back in by itself. To make this easier, actually first pull back the hammer mechanism. Now that the latch that we just placed is here, it will stay there. And that will allow us, actually maybe I've spoken too soon. Oh no, okay, so it gives us a little more play, at least in my case, to like if we push back on the hammer from below to really get to that hole. And now this is kind of like tricky, but essentially you need to get that spring to go into that hole. It can't really jump away, so you have a little bit of like freedom of experimentation. What I do is I come from this side and just kind of start pushing it. Pushing. When it starts touching that area, I start pulling back on it until it snaps into place. It's not completely in yet, as you can see. If I push on it though, or I play with it a little bit, it should like snap into place and actually come out here, like that folded part needs to come out here. So here we go. Now everything, oh, I scratched it a bit, nice. Now everything is in place. Now you can test if everything works. First of all, you can test that the trigger release works by pushing to the left on this piece. And if the trigger comes up, now essentially you can test. Can you pull it back and it stays back? Does the hammer stay back? And when I push, as I've just shown, when I push back on that little wing, come on, does this thing come back up? And does the hammer come back out? And you've done everything correctly. So now this is ready to be installed again. So before we install it though, we still need to talk quickly about those extra pieces here. So we're talking specifically about this plastic piece with the spring attached to it. I'll show it to the camera. This piece, oh come on. It has like a flat, like half a circle on top only. And we need to talk about this, nice, this piece. Now, they, as far as I can tell, aren't like completely necessary. They exist to give a better trigger feel. So I think theoretically you could live without them, but I don't want to try. So we'll install them again. I'll start with this plastic piece. It has a kind of two sides, and it has one side where kind of this plastic wing sticks up on it. Obviously the little pin in the middle here is for the spring to go in. So what I do is I take my tweezers, I pull out the spring like this, I place it on top with that flat, with that like wing thing on top, and then I push it in there till it's, careful, it can jump out. Till it sits there. So you can, as you can just see with my case, the trigger bar was kind of interfering with that. So if you take out the trigger bar, or you kind of make sure the trigger bar isn't in the way, it stays there very nicely. And now we want to take the other part, the little rounded piece with the spring, and right in front of that there's a hole for it, and we want the cutout to face inwards. So we'll kind of have that go into that hole like this. Now, careful again, the trigger bar will actually kind of push on those, and they can jump out when the trigger bar pushes too hard. So definitely be careful with the trigger bar. You want to probably keep it out of the way. You want to pull the trigger for it to come out, and then you can actually already start installing the the fire control mechanism. And to do so, I'm gonna lie the gun on its side. I'm gonna do it like this, because this way those little pieces here, this little rounded piece will not fall out, it'll just stay there. And it also helps us because then we can place the remaining little metal piece. Okay, I'm gonna kind of move this stuff over here. Here we go. We have this remaining little metal piece here with the spring that needs to sit here. So what I do is I place the spring in there, and it'll sit very nicely. And then the little metal piece, obviously it has like this little pin on the side. This one needs to go into the mechanism. Now I push down with my finger, push down on the spring. I come from this side, see if this is visible, with that metal piece. I push against the spring until it kind of jumps in there. And now you need to be very careful because it'll jump out if you don't pay attention to it. So make sure you always have a finger on that it doesn't jump out. And now we can install it. For this, make sure that this hole here with that little metal piece lines up with that little piece on the trigger bar. Again, make sure that the trigger bar can pivot out all the way by pressing the trigger, as we just did. And now you can essentially put the fire control group on top of that trigger bar. Now you see I released here, but you shouldn't do that. And you can start like slowly lowering the fire control group into its designated spot. You can see where it needs to sit because the screw here and the hole here need to be aligning, obviously. But if you do everything right, it will just start to kind of align. There, okay. Make sure that all these little pieces, that we set, the plastic piece here, that spring with that plastic piece, are all in the right place. And immediately, like without much playing around, I recommend putting in that screw that we removed at the beginning to secure it in place. While screwing that in, push down on the screwdriver to really make sure it doesn't strip, because it's actually using, I think it's just plastic underneath, so you need to be careful. Push, screw, and as soon as it stops turning, just stop, don't over tighten it. And there you go. So now you can test again if everything works. You pull back on the hammer thing, whatever it's called, and now if you pull the trigger, it should come back up. And obviously this thing should be able to jump down, and when you release it should jump back up, and you've done everything correctly. So now, just only missing the slide to get it back on. For this, if you have released the trigger, this will not work. So you need to pull this back again and make sure that this metal piece is also down, and only then will it slide over it. And as soon as it kind of reaches that spot, you're good. It will not come back forward, right? And now you can essentially, it works again. To validate that everything works, I have an empty magazine here. Okay, that works. And if I fire, works. And if I push it down and let go, it shoots. So we know everything's working as intended. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching.